Albanese was back on the election trail this week, probably much to the despair of his colleagues, and he did not disappoint.
As we've been saying, economy is front and centre of this election. Do you think the Australian people think you're up to it? Look, I ask that question because I've noticed on several occasions you hand over economic questions to someone else.
It's not right, I'm here, Ali.
You say you know the answers, but I think people sitting at home go, I'm not sure you do, because you don't see Scott Morrison handing over to anyone during this campaign.
You do continually.
You want to be the next Prime Minister. You want to run the country. Shouldn't you be across your briefs?
I am, Ali. I am. Stop reading from the Liberal Party notes that they send through to people all of the time, Ali.
Well, a few hours later, Albanese ran into the same issue. He didn't know key details of his NDIS policy, and the chaos that ensued was just beautiful.
In your speech later on today, you'll talk about the legacy of Labor leaders. One of those legacies is the NDIS. Yesterday, you talked about Labor's 6-point plan. What are the 6 points?
The 6 points are what we will do in terms of was outlined by Bill Houghton. What that's about is making sure. What that's about is Well, if you let me answer the question, what that's about is making sure that we take pressure off people who are at the moment having their programs cut.
No, Mr Albanese, what are the other 5 points, Mr Albanese?
We will put people, it is all around the theme of putting people,
you are across your brief.
We will put people at the centre of the NDIS.
Now, credit to Nine's Jonathan Kearsley for pressing Albanese on his failure to be able to list the points. Unfortunately, a lot of journalists there didn't support Kearsley and were saying to let Albanese get away with the gaffe. Thankfully, our eagle-eyed reporter, Trudy McIntosh, spotted a cheat sheet being handed to the wannabe PM.
Just to clarify, do you not know what the 6 points are for the NDIS question that Mr Kearsley just asked you? But also, sorry,
policy document.
Is this a sign that you don't know what one of your policy is?
Are they the 6 points?
Are these the 6 points here that had to be handed to you by your advisor?
Painful to watch. This is a leader who could not even come up with the unemployment rate or the cash rate when asked at the start of the campaign. And in the last few weeks, journalists have seen through Labor's attempt to shield Albanese from difficult questions.
We see this often in the last week or so in the campaign, that when you are stumbling on an answer, for example, you can bring in a shadow minister or you just defer to them immediately. Is that part of this strategy in order to not see the sort of gaffes we saw day one, but also, to be fair, the gaffe we've just seen today where you didn't know your own policy?
No, that's not right.
He approached a staff member away from the cameras. Now, a few moments later, that same staff member came racing over with a black folder. He then approached the podium or the lectern again as he faced more questions, and then bizarrely read from the folder on what the 6 points were.
Mind you, it's not just the aides trying to shield Albanese. So too is the progressive media, especially the ABC.
I think some will see this as another gotcha attempt by the media, a sideshow to the substance of the campaign.
But headlines are being dominated by a calculated gotcha question about his knowledge of his NDIS policy.
Earlier in the day, Anthony Albanese copped an onslaught from members of his travelling media pack. One asked him, out of the blue, to name the 6 points of Labor's policy for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. The original exchange has been seized on, making for some dramatic-sounding headlines.
And the ABC's political editor, Andrew Probyn, thought Albo wasn't the clear loser of the day.
If not being across details has been Anthony Albanese's problem this campaign.
I'm focused on the contest between Labor and Liberals and myself and Mr Albanese.
Scott Morrison's has been external events, including a big one offshore.
We are threatened with invasion.
Parliament's China Pact has dented the foreign policy credentials of Scott Morrison and the coalition.
And The Conversation's chief political correspondent, Michelle Graddon, tweeted, "A lot of gotcha questions to Albanese. Maybe everyone could be asked to recite their times tables?" In other words, it was just a minor slip-up. But back in reality, Albanese is being scrutinised as he should be. If you want the job of Prime Minister, You should prove that you have not just the knowledge, but also the ability to perform on your feet. And so far, Albanese has raised serious doubts about his suitability on both counts. And here's Seven's political editor, Mike Riley, with his takeaway.
Scott Morrison, though, has struggled to lay a glove on Mr Albanese during this campaign, but if the Labor leader keeps this up, he mightn't have to. If Anthony Albanese keeps falling flat on his face, he might knock himself out.
Well, Daisy, I'd be very keen to hear your thoughts on how the gaffe played out. What do you make of the ABC's, I guess, defence, some might put it, of the gaffe, but the broader reaction from the public?
Look, I think, of course, this is completely unsurprising that the ABC would try to defend Albanese on this. And, of course, you know exactly what happened if the tables returned and it was Scott Morrison making these gaffes. I mean, they'd have the daggers out. They'd be screaming about it for 3 weeks. We all know. I mean, we just discussed it. We know the kind of Labor lovies that work here. And as for the reaction to the broader public, I really, I'm not a fan of Albanese. I'm very sorry for him that this keeps happening, though, because they are just handing the government 3 points. And in an election where, Labor has a very small target policy, there's not a lot to push there. The fact they're handing the government these gaffes makes it so easy for them to paint Anthony Albanese and Labor as not knowing what they're doing while pushing the line they push that they're experienced, they've been in power for a while. And Scott Morrison, he has this talent, and he has a lot of force, but he has this talent of always seeming to know what he's talking about, and he always comes across as very reassuring. Even when we all know he's talking about nothing, he just has this way of hitting the mark, and it really is a talent Albanese doesn't have. My theory, though, with Albanese is that I'm sure he has done the work. I refuse to believe as the opposition leader he hasn't at least studied the brief. I think he gets stage fright. I think in the moment he's done the work, the pressure gets to him. I don't think he's headed up an election campaign like this before. It's a lot of pressure, and I think he just goes blank. Hence the fact he throws to other ministers and he grabs his cheat sheet. That's the only thing I can think of that can explain it. If that is the case and he has a propensity to get stage fright, they need to recognise it and just give him a little folder with an executive summary that he has with him from the start, nicely tabled, just with the dot points. He might get mocked by politicians for that or journalists, but I don't think your average voter would begrudge him at all. Just having a little set of notes in front of him just to avoid these dreadfully awkward, leafing through pages. It was sort of painful to watch. That's my sort of merciful opinion of Albanese, but it is just 3 points that they're handing to the government.
And Evan, just unpacking that a little bit, the mention constantly that these questions are got-you questions. Do you think that that's a fair characterisation, or do you think somebody that wants the top job, they want the economic portfolio, they want to run the country and set the legislative agenda, shouldn't they know just 6 simple points about their own policy?
Exactly, and we saw how much Jamie Diaz was piled on during the 2013 campaign for not knowing the 6 points to turn back the boats. And this is not a gotcha question. This is not asking the unemployment rate as bad as that was that he didn't know it. This is Anthony Albanese's own policy. Now, we hear from backgrounding from Labor MPs on background to journalists that he's never been across his brief. He would show up to shadow cabinet as a shadow minister, not knowing what was going to be discussed. So this is a continuation of that. But also we see the media making excuses for it. As you said, Michelle Grattan, but we see other media as well. I saw ABC reporter Michael Slezak saying, I don't think this is making our profession look very good. And you've got all these Guardian journalists making excuses saying this is much more important issue. I mean, come on. This is his own policy. He has a 6-point policy and he doesn't need to know it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Evan.